And go. Wonderful. Welcome everybody to my short talk on limiting drops for conflicting types in Snap for young learners, or how I learned to stop worrying and love this feature. This is part of the SnapCon 2020 conference. I wanted to start with a video, and I'll set the video up. I was working with my daughter. I have a middle school BJC group, bjc.link. Maybe Max can type that into bjc.link/bjcms for middle school. And I was working for young learners, 9 to 12-year-old folks. And I'm teaching them map, and we're loving it. We're playing with map, and I'm teaching them keep, and that's just wonderful. And keep takes a predicate and a list. And how I was teaching this was I was creating what's called a Parsons problem, which is I would create the solution and then scramble all the blocks of the solution to different parts of the window, of the editing window, and I'd say re-scramble them. So they didn't see me create the original one, and I said just do that. So they didn't have to find it at all. It was actually, it's kind of easier than, I mean, Snap is already easier than text-based languages because you have to memorize commands in text-based languages. In Snap, you kind of have them all here, but you don't know, there's so many to choose from. It's like going to the supermarket, just too many things to do. So I said, here's exactly what you need to make the perfect meal, to make the perfect keep block, keep all the evens or something from some special thing. And what I was noticing, this is as students were just barely learning domain and range, they were swapping and they were kind of getting confused of the icons, and they were putting the list into the predicate and putting the predicate into the list slot. So let me show you my daughter, who was 9 at the time. There's a video, and I'll show you an experience I had with her as she was teaching me I was also teaching them how to convert binary numbers to decimal. So this is her teaching me how to convert binary numbers to decimal. This is a snippet of the video. Let's see here. Okay, and go. Can you hear my video? Can you hear that? Did you just hear some noise? Say no. No. Okay.
No, I don't think so.
No worries. I'm gonna share again, and then when I do share, I will click share. Computer sound, I forgot to do that. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Boom, fast, share. Okay, and then now tell me whether you can hear this, and go.
And so, but why do you need
to
convert it to a list though? Why are you converting it to a list?
Can you hear that?
Oh, because
Yep, it's perfect.
this cannot go over here because it's not this plane cannot go over here because it's not a list.
Oh, it can't go by itself, you mean?
These thingy-mabobbers?
They're thingy-bobbers. That's a technical term. I like that. That's good.
These only take in lists.
Right. And
So this isn't a list, so we can't go in there. If you just put it in there, it'll say error.
Okay, so go ahead. So tell me
And
that.
by the way, you knew it was a number because she even said binary number. She said that this is an input type of a number. That's why this is round. And so she knew that that was a number, and it went into there, and she said, it'll be an error.
So you have to put the word to list.
So you have
Okay,
to
and
put
to
Word
list. So
or
that's
a number in this case.
So that's making all those.
Okay.
And
So here's my question to you. Why is there an error? Why does my 9-year-old know that that'll be an error? Why do we just prevent that from happening? So I wanted to talk about that. Here's my proposal. Here's a proposal number 1. And you see whether you like this or not. Booleans and numbers and lists, I think of them as different things. We talk about them in our BJC course, domain and range. If something's supposed to take, if I say, what's the domain of plus, and they say a Boolean, I'm going to say wrong. Those are different things. So I'm going to propose that Booleans and numbers and lists are different. There are 3 mutually exclusive types. And I'm going to propose, this is a red arrow saying, this outside arrow would say, taking a Boolean and then dropping it into a number slot would be impossible. Not just an error, but not able to do it. Okay? So let's take a little bit of a look at this picture that I created. Of these 3 types, Boolean, lists, and numbers, Booleans, here's a Boolean, it takes a Boolean, reports a Boolean. We call this a predicate. It has an input shape, a hexagon. It has an output shape, a hexagon, check and check. How about numbers? They have an input shape, they're round, but they do not have an output shape. This rounded oval is the generic reporter side. Here's a generic reporter. I said, make foo, take, and I didn't tell anything about types. I don't want to have to hit them over the head with types. So I say, here's foo, It just foo of X, and that's what I got. So this is the generic input, and the shape is the generic output. So notice the number and foo look identical. So there's no distinct output shape. Lists have a beautiful, and this is actually a reformatted in Snap 6, input shape, but no output shape as well. So let's put that in the back of your mind as I talk about this. But I propose that Booleans, numbers, and lists should never be able to be dragged into each other. That's what I'm proposing. Except, and I'm going to show you a demo. This is a story. I'm taking you through a narrative. I'm taking you through a path of a conversation here. All right, here we go. So here is Snap. And I first want to show you an interesting feature about Snap, which is, here's set value to 0. Set value to 0. And if I say, well, if value, then true, otherwise false. So is value true or false? Remember, it's 0. What do you guys think? Okay, everybody in the chat, tell me what you think it'll be. Let's see if we can do a live chat here. Go ahead. Tell me what you think it'll be if I click on that. Here we go. Go ahead. Chat. Okay, no, false. I'm seeing 1 false. Okay, here we go. 0. Look, I clicked set value to 0. Boom, clicked. Says 0. I'm seeing Russell, false. Karen, false. Matthias, true. Yadka, true. Clifford, true. Look at this. There's discussion. There's dissension in the ranks. If I click to set 0, this is treated as true. I can show you. What's not of true is false. So it is considered true. But here's the strange thing. Watch this one. Set value to 0 plus 0. Watch how this. Tell me if this changes. Ready? Here we go. There, I clicked it. No visible change to the user. And now what do you think will happen? It's now false. So there's something fishy about whether 0, if you type it in, it turns out it's true. But if you have it as an expression, it turns out it's false. So it's a little fishy here. Anyway, let me just show you this. Numbers from 0 to 2. Map not over that. What should happen? Are these considered, does that work? Come on. This should be, for me, this should be domain error, not as expecting a Boolean variable and you're giving me a number. That's what I would expect. Look what you get when you map not over this thing. Okay? Not true, false, false. And I believe this even works in hyperblocks. Watch this crazy thing. Boop. That's pretty cool. And now, well, let's take that. Okay, so first of all, now I know that the arrow that was supposed to prevent the arrow from numbers to Boolean, let's let it happen. Because people may have written, there may be 1 million projects out there that use this. Okay, well, how about the other way? Now I have a list of Booleans. I certainly can't add them to a number. Well, maybe I can. True, false, false becomes 1, 0, 0. So let's now go back to my proposal. Remember, this is a narrative. This is supposed to be a story. Okay, so that was proposal number 1. Proposal number 2, okay, aside from numbers to Booleans. Here's Booleans and numbers. Let's let that happen. We got 1 million projects out there that let that. And by the way, I have one myself, so I wanted to let you know. Aside from that, let's prevent that from happening. Good stuff, right? Except now, and I kind of gave it away. The hyperblock still works. So now this plus that wasn't supposed to take a list, because remember, here's my slide that you can't go from Boolean to list sorry, you can't go from lists to numbers or lists to Booleans. I kind of just did that. So here's a list, and I put the list into numbers, and that works. And before I had a list of, where was my guy? Here's a list of predicates, and that list goes into this and that way. So lists can go in to now both. Okay, so this is a narrative. So now, except for the hyperblocks. Okay, so proposal number 3. Okay, so I'm adjusting the proposal dynamically. Okay, they're mostly mutually exclusive, okay? So here's what's left. Here's what's left of my proposal. Remember, my goal is to make it easy so my daughter doesn't, and 9-year-olds, and the future sets of 9-year-olds that haven't been born yet, don't need to worry about that this is an error. It shouldn't be an error. So here's what I'm left with. I'm never gonna allow non-lists to be dropped into list slots. So here's Boolean, can't drop it into a list slot. Here's a number, can't drop into a list slot. So let's actually look at that. Let's actually take some time. Let's make a new sprite or something and clear the screen. All right, here's a list slot, okay? Does it ever make sense to have a non-list in that list slot? I claim no. I claim it doesn't make sense to me. I can't think of any time where, and by the way, I think things still drop. Let me just show you. This still drops. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I'm claiming what I'm left with and trying to make it easier for young learners. I'm talking about 9 years old and below, is that lists are special and nothing that's not a list can be dragged into a list. Okay, so that's proposal number 3. But how do we know? How do we know what the return type of things are? Only predicates have shapes. Only predicates and commands. Look, my whole point of this is, look, here's a command. Why doesn't this drop in? This is my whole point. I should have started with this, and I'm sorry for it. Watch, doesn't drop. No white, doesn't get white. Look, okay, nothing's getting white. So this is a different shape. This is a different shape too. These are the only 3 shapes I have. I have roundy shapes, I have hexagon shapes, and I have puzzle pieces. So I'm proposing one change, which is this should not go in there. And that's pretty clear, okay? That's good. That's fine. I can do that. I know it's a shape. It doesn't fit the picture. But then you're saying, well, Dan, why does this is a round shape? That's a square thing. So why does that work? If you're telling me that these things have to match their whole shape, list already doesn't match that whole shape. It's a rounded thing. It's round. It produces a square. So I'm already, my building is starting to crumble at its foundation. I'm trying to make this easier for young learners. But only predicates have shapes. So let's say we do that. Let's say, look, I feel comfortable. This is a different shape. We have no trouble not letting, no trouble. Well, commands don't work. I don't have trouble saying that predicates should never fit into that slot. I'm okay with that. Aha, I'm seeing add more shapes. Russell, I like where you're going, my friend. Here's the thing. A generic reporter is here. Here's a generic reporter with rounded shapes. But this is controversial. This is why I'm having a conversation. How do we know? Only predicates have shapes. We don't want people to have to worry about it when they're making blocks. There's no way I'm going to teach types to a young kid. I just want to make it easier out of the box, so that out of the box they take not, and out of the box they take something that takes a list, and it wouldn't work. Just like commands wouldn't work, okay? But they shouldn't have to. People should not have to. This is a design principle for me. You shouldn't have to go in and adjust the types. And by the way, you know this if you've ever done this, and maybe you haven't. If you haven't, when you make a block, you tell it what 3 types. Here's only 3. And then if I say foo of percent, y, here's I put foo bar. I think I have a foo already. Here's foo bar. I can click on y, and look, this lets me choose from a ton of different input shapes. If you haven't seen this, it's a delightful menu, and you can choose from a dozen different shapes here, okay? So now we're starting to say, how can we make it easier so people aren't making mistakes, okay? So this is a fine line. I like this one, but I'm having trouble already with this numbers line. This numbers line is saying numbers shouldn't fit in that, but how do I know it's a number? Here's a generic foo that happens to return a list, and here's a list that happens to be the same round shape as foo. If you're starting to make me know that shapes can't fit into things that don't match them, then that doesn't work, because generic reporters fit into everybody. They should always fit into everybody, because we don't know what they're going to be, and kids don't know this. But numbers have the same shapes as generics. All right, so I'm having, whoops, I clicked on the bottom. So now we're at proposal 4. Proposal 4 is just limited to predicates, okay? Just limited to predicates. By the way, yes, Yadga, blocks which return different things, they'd be a generic. They wouldn't have a shape, right? Look, you got a predicate. here's a predicate that's going to return 2 types. Do you actually shape it like a predicate? If it's going to sometimes return a number or a list, I wouldn't. I would only leave predicates to be only predicates. So if you're going to have these shapes, it'll be the pure guys. And if it's generic, if it's ever like a multi kind of type, then have it be generic, okay? Could we be more bold? I want to ask the community, could we be more bold? In this spirit of trying to make this easy for beginning learners, could we be more bold? So here's what I'm proposing. Maybe, let's have this conversation. Generic reporters are one shape, numbers are another shape, and lists are yet a third. Okay, this is the bold proposal. And whoops, I keep clicking the wrong thing. So the modest proposal is simply limit predicates dropped into lists. You wouldn't need to change anything. If someone made something that was a predicate but didn't shape it as a predicate, it would work. But the moment they actually say it's a predicate in their, make a block. Back over here, when you say, let's go back to my block and use, let's edit foobar. I think I made foobar a command. If I want to edit and make this, once I click up here, whoops, because foobar is on the stage, I can't edit it. Let me go back over here. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Now I click this, I can edit it. All right. So here, I have 3. So the generic one was, if I decide, if let's say foobar was a generic reporter, that's fine. It'll work in anything. But if I ever say predicate, including things that come out of the box as predicates, they wouldn't work in lists. I think that can happen today. We can make that change today, and nothing would break. Nothing would break because there's no time that's ever worked where a predicate has been, well, okay, well, I'll say this. What if you're making a shape of it? Maybe I can, here's the shape of a predicate, but it was returning a list. It was going to return a list. Well, if it's already in there, it's not a trouble. Where's my return, okay? It's already returning a list. Let's just make it return a list, okay? This, if it were already in this, if this guy were already in, let's go here, if this were already in that, then it wouldn't break that project. But I'm proposing this, which is weird. It's saying predicate, it's returning list. I'm proposing this will no longer turn white. That's what I'm proposing. So you still have this thing that maybe should work, but I'm saying we shouldn't let that happen because that's kind of a weird thing. That's the modest proposal. All right. Here is the bold proposal, and let's talk about, and I'll stop sharing, and I really want to have the conversation. I'm not going to, I'll stop speaking for the rest of the session. We have, I think, 13 minutes. We design new shapes for list, and we design new shapes for numbers, and that's different from generics. And whatever that, we have to figure out what that shape should be. It should be pretty. Snap is pretty. I don't want it to have sharp edges, but maybe it should. Maybe it should match the sharp edges of list. I don't know. Let's talk about what that might be. We design a shape for list, we design a shape for numbers, and only lists and generic reporters. Remember, reporters, you don't have to say the kid starts up, makes a reporter. Yes, that'll work. Always generic reporters is like the blood type that always works for everybody else. But only lists and those work in numbers, which now have a different shape. Predicates, which we talked about over here, different shape, don't drop into lists. So that means, and that's actually kind of neat, because then what it'll mean is it'll tell you, if you do this, look, length of returns a number. That'll be one shape. All but first of returns a list. That'll be over here. Here's the list shape, guys. What would be a list shapes? In front of, item 1 of, this is generic. I don't know what the item is. So this is like the generic shape. This is the number shape. And this is the list shape. And I'll have some sense of what drops in what. If this is still going to stay round, I feel like then that should stay round. But with numbers, anyway, that's why that's a discussion, you get a rabbit hole. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I would love to have a conversation. We don't have that many people here. I'm looking at 21 people. So let's talk. What do you think? And I see a grump from Yadka. Yadka, you're the first to speak. Let's talk. I know that, you're in Snap every day, 24/7. So am I, basically. Let's talk about this. You also care about young learners. I care about young learners. We're on the same page there. It's not like we're fighting there. I'm just trying to prevent my daughter from having that trouble. So tell me what you think about my modest and bold. I'll go back to this. The modest, if you remember, was just predicates, prevented from lists, and bold is new shapes. Go. I'll stop talking.
I have 2 things. I think having more shapes makes or requires that people learn more about shapes. Right now, you can just try stuff without knowing what a shape means. That wouldn't work anymore. And I don't like the idea of not be able to just not drop things, because actually sometimes people have like issues dropping stuff, which is more like a motorical issue, and then you wouldn't know if it's a motorical thing or if it's actually a programmatic thing. So I think the error message might even be more helpful in this case.
Well, so how about this? I've heard the comment before. By the way, this is like the third or fourth time I've shared this with my TAs and stuff like this. So I'm gonna tell you what I tell them, which is, all right, how about this? I go back, given your argument, let's go back and take commands and let commands now be dropped in reporter blocks. You told me that you don't want to have people to worry about shapes. And I'm saying, I want to be like commands. So if you're saying don't learn about them, then let's let commands drop in everywhere and then have all these error messages. I don't think any of us want that. But maybe you do. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. So if you're letting me not drop commands, then using that logic, let's not prevent. That's what I'm saying to that.
Yeah, sure. I think basically, I'm not 100% against it. We could try it. I think but I personally rather not have predicates and just have reporters and
commands. Interesting.
Commands, because I think one is rather what does that block shape, and the other one is what does it report actually. So it's more a domain specific compared to a, I don't know how to call that, functional specific thing. So I'm kind of feeling you're mixing up things on two different levels, which also the predicates do already. So,
right. By the way, I'll just say, just like a position statement. I don't like types. The reason I don't like Java, it's verbose, and I have to tell it what type everything is. I love Python and Snap because I can just use it, and Scheme. I can just use it and not have to worry about types. So I'm in the spirit of not worrying about types, and I don't want kids to have to worry about types here. This is why you make a generic block and it just always works. But it'll help you in preventing an error. I don't want my daughter to know about the word error. Let other people talk. Other thoughts?
There are also hyperblocks, though. Like hyperblocks return a list, even if they're predicate shaped.
That's exactly right, Russell. Outstanding. Thank you for that. Yeah. So hyperblocks kind of break that model. That's exactly right. So maybe my whole proposal falls to the ground with that point, because if I was going to prevent predicates, but it's actually a predicate with a list in it that actually makes it return a list, and now it should work. So meaning like, yeah, I mean, there's no reason you should have to drag the list into the predicate, and then now because it's a hyperblock and it's not returning a list, that can drop in. But if you did the predicate first and then the list later, that wouldn't. So I think you're right. I think this whole thing falls to the ground with hyperblocks. And this, by the way, this talk was set up before Snap 6. I'm just letting you know. So I was ready for this before Snap 6. It just, I don't know anymore. You're exactly right. Hyperblocks means that all numbers and all lists now return lists, and that works now. So I think you're exactly right.
I was kind of also arguing against the logical operators working with hyperblocks, but I lost, unfortunately.
Well, no, I mean, no. I mean, they don't work with and they don't work with or, because and or are special. But they work with not.
And I think, for example, if you drop a list in it, and it's a list that basically just contains false, and I drop that into an if, it would still work, because a list with whatever is true.
Right.
So
is an empty list false? I forget whether an empty list is false. We can go try that really fast.
Yeah, I don't know.
I forget whether an empty list, because Python says if it's an empty string, it's false. If it's a string, it's anything else. I think that's what happens in my string case, by the way, because it's a 0 that I typed it in. It's treated as a string, which means it's not an empty string, which means it's true, even though it says 0 and it's treated as a number and it looks like it's equal. Like that's there. So that's there. Other folks, other thoughts about this, but I think you're exactly right. I think that the nail in the coffin was the hyperblocks, actually, which kills this whole idea. I want to remove errors. Yeah, go ahead, please.
My proposal would be to have a new shape only for lists, and I would argue that lists is not a type. Types are numbers, Boolean. List is a constructor to put certain atoms put certain atoms together.
Okay.
And therefore, it's a different structure, and therefore also you get all these errors. So I would argue if you have lists visually distinguishable from numbers and numbers and text and booleans and so on, it would make it easier.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. What's your response to the comment about hyperblocks, which is now numbers and predicates?
I'm not into hyperblocks yet. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
It's too new for me.
No, I mean, certainly, hyperblocks is something you can disable, right? It's a menu option under the settings menu. So I could live and not teach hyperblocks and live in that, and it's consistent in that world. But it's an interesting question. Let me try to read the other. Gurkhan, help me think of these other things that people are sharing. Yeah, I was looking, Philip, talking about this. I was thinking about what shapes it'd be. You might have the angle brackets. Like it starts to get jagged and angry. Like if you take like a predicate and flip it, it's now sharp and can cut you. And I'm starting to worry about my fingers when so it's a little bit soft and rounded everything. But if you sharpen things in the other way, I think it's an interesting thing. Like infinite oval has a sharp edge. Like what my first proposal was list. I mean, I even half of the slides, I spent half of the time trying to mock up what I would do for list, which was sharp edges and da-da-da-da. But then, everything is rounded and pretty. It's like everything is, it's called beveled. Everything is beveled. And I don't like to go back to the sharp edges thing. So I'm not sure. I think there are many people in the Snap community, including Yadga, who don't want to add more types. You don't want to add more cognitive load. Like, okay, now I have to remember what that shape is and that shape is and that shape is and that shape is. But it is possible that could help a young user if it actually were perfectly consistent, like always consistent, where the shape only fit into that. I think that would actually be helpful. As I'm putting my thing together, okay, well, that doesn't work because you obviously can't put a triangle into a square. It's like the square peg like you could do this, but there's enough blurring of it that, what's a generic one shape? So that, like generic should go everywhere. So now you have to have a shape that goes everywhere compared to everybody else that only goes in themselves. So I think it's too hard. I feel like I brought this out there to bring it up as an issue where I think I would love to see fewer errors. I think all of us like to see fewer errors. When we do see errors, I'd like to see the errors be really descriptive, and I'd like to see fewer errors in general. But I'd like to try this out. I think it'd be fun to try it out. And by the way, Jens has been open to. We've had this. Jens has been. It's not like just me. Without Jens and Yadga have been in this conversation for a while, and have been open to trying this out. Hidden behind a menu where I can play with it. It's released. People can play with it. And if you're in a young person's environment, you can actually turn it on. So that might be something we can think about. Exactly. Hyperblocks are disabled, and this is enabled. Like the idea of block drop prevention is enabled, hyperblocks is disabled. Now it's consistent, and now predicates don't drop in. So it's at least a little step to that. The moment you undo that, then it becomes this confusing thing of why can I drop that even though it's returning a list. So that's a conversation. Even in the other conversation we were talking. This is in the workshop this morning. We were talking about hyperblocks and whether we teach hyperblocks in our courses, in our curriculum, BJC, or whether we keep map and maybe hyperblocks is something that's extra. I think it'd be fun to explore. I think there's a space out there to explore. What would it look like if you went from scratch? If you designed it on a whiteboard from a clean room, and then decided independent shapes, and there weren't any overlapping. That's, there's really, you just had this thing, there's only one generic, and that goes in everywhere, and everybody else is totally independent, and there's none of that. So you'd almost disable the idea that a number could go in a Boolean and back and forth, and see whether that makes things easier for a young learner. Because certainly young learners may or may not be, trying to add true to a number, but it works. But I don't think that's what they probably want when they're first thinking about that. So just thinking about that space. Jaco, what's your top error? Is the things dropped into the list box?
It's actually what Clifford wrote. It's expecting list but getting number.
Oh yeah, no, yeah,
or getting something else.
No.
Because all the time when you work with data, you like one step too far or not far enough, and you always get the wrong type.
Oh my gosh! And here's the thing: it doesn't tell you where. Like that's one of the proposals we've had is like it should bubble up and say right here. See this at the third recursive call. I just need to see that. Like that, just having it's somewhere down my stack of calls. Foo calls, bar calls, baz, 20 down, 20 deep. Just pop it up. And they talked about that. Brian has said like pop up exactly where because they know, like the system knows where it is. Why not open the editor block and show you right here is where it is, and who knows what recall levels got to there. But that's the guy that was that flagged it. That'd be great. Good stuff. I've got about 30 seconds left. Any last thoughts? Thank you so much for this talk. This is mostly to This is great. Look, 30 people just to kind of motivate the community to think about this. I think that space is always out there to try to improve. And if I summarize the talk and this discussion is, I think there's always a space to improve it for young learners as Snap is being introduced younger and younger. People in EDC are doing it in grade school. I just love that. So let's continue to think about ways to improve for young learners. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the next session.